So this is week 4, and we're on the 4th out of the 4 Guru Slokas. They're all great. This one, I don't know. Sorry. I would say this one is my favorite, along with the other 3, which are also all my favorite. So let's chant together. Dhyanamulam Gurur Murti, Puja Mulam Gurur Padam, Mantra Mulam Gurur Vakyam, Moksha Mulam Guru Kripa. The root of meditation is the Guru's form. The root of worship, the Guru's feet. The root of mantra, the Guru's word. The root of freedom, the Guru's grace. Well, thank you for coming tonight. I think we're done. All you have to do is meditate on that sloka for the rest of your life, and you'll be all taken care of. Each of those things. What is the Guru's form? What are the Guru's feet? If all the words are mantras, what does that mean? Yeah. And the root of freedom, the Guru's grace. So I chose some stories for this session and have a nice amount for this session and next week. And without realizing it, the one that I put first on the list for tonight happens to be about an appetizer. So we're starting with an appetizer. I think I had no idea. Me, of all people, you would think I would have tuned into any food thing like that. Always food. Yeah. So this one involves Bhajis, which Bhajis are, and they're called by different names, probably in different regions, but I know them as Bhajis. It's a batter dipped vegetable appetizer, which I love and many of us love. And I did what I've done over the years, pretty good cook. So I just read every bhaji recipe I could lay my hands on. I had never made it before. And then I modified the whole thing and tweaked the spicing of the batter. It's a chickpea batter, and it was onion bhaji, which were my favorite, although they're all good. And you take dollops of this and put it in very hot oil, spoonfuls. Gurudev always used the example of bhajis frying as an example of how you get quiet after the world has fried you. Because when you first put it into the oil, the bhaji batter, you can imagine very hot wok filled with oil, and you put in a dollop of this very wet, like kind of thick pancake batter, drop it in. And so it makes a lot of noise, bubbling wildly, fizzing and, moving around in the oil. And he would always say that when all the moisture is cooked out, when you're properly roasted, he would use this as an analogy for sannyas, the way sannyas orange, like Kamsanandaji is wearing, right, is like what happens when a bhaji gets well cooked. And when the bhajis get well cooked, they float up to the surface. That's how you know they're done. And they just start floating around quietly. They're not noisy anymore. They're just peaceful. So I was teaching myself how to make bhajis for the very first time. And this adapted recipe that I did, I thought came out really well. And I took them it was some big occasion, and there was a big party at the metros, and I took them to the big party. And people went suitably wild over them. And an visiting Indian couple came over and they said, "Oh, it's just like being back in India. These are so good. You made this yourself." And, so I was quite proud of this naturally and happy as any cook would be. And I felt like they had gone so well that I should, of course, see if I could send some to Gurudev. So I had sent some through his secretary after getting permission to send some over. So then the next day was a big feast in Shivananda Hall. It was a long weekend celebration. It might have been Jayanti or Guru Purnima. I can't remember the exact what occasion it was, but we had a big meal with Gurudev. He sat at the head table. We all ate. He came around visiting different people, and he came over to me, and he said, he leaned over and he said, it's hard to tell this with a straight face. He said, "Who taught you how to make bhajis?" So I took it that way, the way I just said it, like in wonderment, like, "Who taught you how to make bhajis?" And I said, "Well, Gurudev, I just read a lot of recipes and kind of combined them and just taught myself," thinking that he was praising the bhajis like everybody else. And then he looked at me and he said, "I had to take them with and he indicated with a pile of napkins like this and squeeze them." And he mimed squeezing them to get out all of the excess oil. And, I had chosen the best oil for a high temperature and all that. And so what he was really saying was, "Who taught you how to make bhajis?" Which I just walked in just completely blindly, not knowing that that's where this was going at all. And then he instructed me on how to make bhajis. And he gave me a very important instruction. And then I always followed that from then on. He said, "You should get the oil as hot as possible. And then when they go in, they'll cook fast and they won't absorb so much oil." And that was the instruction, but it was master instruction from a master chef. If you read, I think it's in Apostle of Peace or one of his biographies or stories of him, there's actually a scene where he makes bhajis. He's the guest at some devotee's home, and it's quite an amazing story about how he finds a Murti there that needs polishing, and he spends a lot of time polishing. I think it was a Ganesh statue, and restoring it, doing a little puja to it, and then cooking his hosts a meal. And it mentions that he ground his own chickpea flour, which is what you use to make bhajis, from chickpeas. So they didn't have the ingredients, and he went, ultra, I didn't even dream of grinding my own flour. So, on top of everything else, a master chef who took the time to tell me the best way to make bhajis. So that makes me think of another food story. So I'll tell you this one now that we've finished with the appetizer. In the early days of Yogaville West in Ziegler Springs, we had a business making bagels. And then his name was Ramanan, and a whole big cast of characters, go-getters, and cooks and whatnot, figured out this industry. And we had cornered the bagel market for California. We could sell all the bagels that we could make. We made a lot of varieties. We did it all by hand. They were the only healthy bagels anybody was making in the early 70s, virtually, that we knew of anyway. And working and making, after you figured out the whole thing, about like $1 or $1.50 an hour. We could sell all the bagels we could make. That was the one little problem, is that we weren't mechanized at all. Everything was by hand. So we're selling more and more, and we're making, nothing, basically. And at one point we had to make all these renovations. The health department came in and said we had to do all these things to the facility we were using. Not that it wasn't really very nice and sanitary, but they kind of turned the screws on us according to the law, and we didn't want to go out of business. So we made an arrangement with the Seventh-day Adventist college that was a few hours away. And instead of baking bagels every day of the week, we had to load everything. They had a professional bakery. Seventh-day Adventists are very into vegetarian food, and there are still commercial brands that they make or that they originally made. And so we would pack everything into an 18-foot box truck, lots and lots of cars, take lots of staff that didn't normally work in the bagel making, drive an hour and a half before dawn. We would leave like at 2:30 or 3, because they could only give us the bakery on their one day of the week that they weren't baking in it. And we were in heaven. We had all this professional equipment that rolled out the dough, and these giant mixers, and a huge rotary oven, professional bakery oven, because they baked commercially, like what we were trying to do, but the right way. So we would do everything that would take us a week to do, we would manage to do in one day. So it was like a major D-Day invasion plan to get us there. And we had the time of our lives. It was totally great. And because they were pioneers in vegetarian food, and in those days, there weren't many, even in California, there weren't that many vegetarian restaurants, much less vegan or anything like that. But they had a cafeteria, and they very graciously invited us to come. I think they sort of admired our camaraderie and our craziness to try to do this whole thing and bring all of our ingredients and everything and work so intensively and joyfully. So they graciously said, come to the cafeteria and have whatever you want. The meal's on us. So we're all in our early 20s. Some of us are in our teens, and we've been working ferociously for hours and hours. This is at the end of our shift. So we go into the cafeteria sort of like a horde of locusts. And they've clearly said, have whatever you want, as much as you want, it's on us. And we're also, typically impoverished, like in our organization. If you had $20 to do something, you were rich. So this was heaven, especially since we were really hungry. So we went down the line, and not only was it free food, but it was all fake versions of meat food that many of us had only given up recently or for a few years. So here were the fake, turkey croquettes, and here was this and that, and hamburgers, cheeseburgers. And we were loading up our trays with tremendous amounts of food because it was all free, and we wanted to try it all. And it wasn't just me. I can guarantee that we really heartily got into it and got it back to our table. And around this time, Gurudev arrived. I think we knew he was coming, and they had invited him to come. And I won't tell you every detail of what happened, but the key thing is that he came over to the table. He saw how much food we had all taken, all 20-some of us, and he looked very serious. He said, He said, you're going to eat every morsel of everything that you took. And not only was it protein dense, it was carb dense, like macaroni and cheese, and about a third of the way into this meal, you felt yourself going, and he ferociously told us that we were going to finish everything that we took. obviously quite displeased with the fact that we had were receiving this gracious offer and taking advantage of it in a way that wasn't exactly graceful on our part. A graceful example of yoga. They loved us, though, and we loved them. And the food was good. It was not that good in that quantity, though. So here's one more food story, and then we'll go to something really much more rarefied. This was in the San Francisco IYI, also in those early days. And Gurudev gave satsang up in the, the top floor where the cupola was, the meditation hall, which we used for satsangs when we had special guests. Quite a glorious place. Everyone should go visit it sometime. And that institute is still thriving. And Gurudev was walking out, and prasad was passed out, as is customary when we have a big gathering. Prasad meaning blessed food. And even though you all know those names that I see on the screen, I'm saying some of this for the sake, perhaps, of some people who may see the recording later who might not know all about our terminology. So this is blessed food. And whenever we have gatherings, we have that at the end of the program, normally. So Gurudev is going out, and they had made these really, there was a lot of things made in the name of health food in those days that Gurudev would sometimes comment on after the fact that it was like incredibly heavy. And we had made, somebody, not we, this wasn't me in this case, had made these big balls of, like mashed raisins and dates and sunflower seeds. And, there was enough dried fruit and protein in this to be used to sink a submarine. And he was walking past the tray, and right in front of me, he turned and kind of looked me in the eye, and he said, and he reached down towards one of these very heavy balls that was on the tray. And instead of taking it as it was being offered to him, he took his index finger and thumb, and like this, with very exaggerated precision, he just pinched the tiniest little piece of it. And then very slowly, he leaned back, opened his mouth, and dropped it into his mouth. And he looked at me and he said, "Prasad should always be small." So I think that was just like the Bhajis was about more than Bhajis. That was about more than what size prasad should be. It was very, very interesting. Okay, on to another time that Gurudev showed up in person in an unusual setting, in an unusual body. I was on my way to, I'll say who it was because it's our beloved sister, Yanam, and who we all, I'm sure, miss. But she's having a birthday party in Charlottesville. And I had driven up, and on the way to the birthday party, being one of her good friends, I was really looking forward to it. I was invited. Lakshmi was invited. She was coming from elsewhere. And I had taken our car, and I had heard this tip that if your car was running hot, which ours was, I think I heard it on the radio, probably listening to Car Talk. I'm not a car guy at all, but I like listening to certain stuff. So I had heard this tip about power cleaning the radiator grill in your car. And that if you got all the bugs off and everything, and there's a lot of bugs when you drive in the country at twilight, like when I would get off work and drive home, you'd get lots of bugs in the car. Clean off the radiator really well, and it will work more efficiently. So not knowing really what I was doing, I took it to a car wash miles away from where the party was, and said, well, I've got enough extra time, I'll do this. So I pulled in and, paid the money for the automatic spray wand, which was very high pressure. And I sprayed off the radiator really powerfully. And I knew that there was a day, I knew a little bit. I knew that you could crack the block if the engine was really hot and you didn't want to get water in the wrong places. So I was being careful, I thought. And then I took the car, which was running perfectly, and started it back up to drive it down onto the street and go over to Yanam's. And when I started it started up literally like this. It was just shaking and rattling, and your teeth would practically fall out. I had really, in all my years up to that point, I had never been in a car that behaved like this suddenly. And I sputtered. I had to get out of the way of the cars behind me, and I kind of rolled down to the curb, and the car was shaking violently, and I didn't know what to do. So I did what men who don't know anything about cars do. I heard a comedian say this once: you open the hood and you look inside, hoping to see something like an unplugged extension cord that you could plug back in. This is when you know nothing. So I'm gazing into the car. I don't see anything that looks like that. I check like the spark plug wires a little bit, which is sort of like that. Make sure everything looks tight. I don't know anything. So nothing is working. And I try it again and again. Car is shaking violently and obviously impossible to drive. So I'm sitting there at the curb and I say, Gurudev, because Gurudev could fix anything. And he loved working on cars, cameras, helicopters, anything, airplanes, big dirt moving equipment. I mean, I'm sorry, Gurudev. he taught us never say dirt, it's earth. So I said a little prayer. I said, Gurudev, I know that you perfectly know how to fix this. You know what's wrong. You know how to fix this. I don't know anything, and I certainly don't want to impose on you at all. It would be really it would be really nice if I could make it to Yanam's birthday party, and there's no way I'm going to make it. But I know you know how. Maybe you could, somehow show me how. And shortly after, and I said it just like that, really, really detached. I thought that was the good part. I was very attuned at that moment. I don't want to impose, but if you could possibly help, it would be awfully nice. And within minutes, a pristine pickup truck pulled up and stopped right in front of me. I had the hood up, and out steps. I'll cut to the chase. I won't save this for later. Out steps an angel. It's this man. He's wearing a white shirt. He's wearing blue jeans that are like perfect, clean and shining. And his white dress shirt, no tie, is clean and shining. And he seems to radiate light. Literally, there was something about his face and his hair. And he came over without being asked at all. And he said, oh, you're having some trouble. I told him what I had done. And he said, oh, remember I had said, you know exactly how to fix this, Gurudev. I know you do. He said, oh, when you sprayed it, you probably got some water in the distributor. And he very delicately, the way I've seen Gurudev handle tools, the way Gurudev handles tools, he very delicately took out a knife that had a screwdriver on it, and he unscrewed the distributor cap very gently. He wasn't getting a speck on him, which those we all know Gurudev could work in very, the kind of conditions that would, retire your wardrobe, and he could do that without getting a speck on him. this man worked like that, leaning over the hood, shining, radiating light. He took the cap off. He had the perfect thing in his truck to dry out. So there was moisture under it. He put it back on. He clipped it, and he said, "Try it now." I tried it. Started right up, ran perfectly. And I was so grateful. And I said, "Thank you so much. Can I pay you something for your time? This is so wonderful that you did this." And he said, he said, no. He said, now you know what to do. So if you ever come across somebody else who has this problem, you just can pay it forward. You can help them. So beautiful. So I have no doubt this was not an ordinary man in a pickup truck. And I got to the party right on time. In no particular order, the next story on the list is about Laurel and Hardy and the Honeymooners and I Love Lucy. So Gurudev liked slapstick comedy and a lot. And somebody had given him a set of movies of Laurel and Hardy when we were in the Connecticut ashram. And and this definitely was Guru Purnima, he had a projector set up because they had given the movies as actual, movie. Have you seen cans of film, big reels of film? Home movies of Laurel and Hardy movies. He had them set up a projector. We never saw movies this was unheard of, but it was a present and he wanted to share it with us. And he started showing us these Laurel and Hardy movies. And if you don't know Laurel and Hardy, shame on you. I happen to love Laurel and Hardy. Not everybody would, though. And that was evident on this occasion because they do the type of humor where, you pour like a bottle of ink on the other person when you're having a fight, and they sit there very calmly waiting to retaliate, and then they'll like rub the ink off and then they'll return something else in kind. So it's kind of like Three Stooges, but in a slightly more refined way, but nonetheless pretty violent. There's a lot of, boards to the head and that kind of thing going on. And I love this stuff and grew up loving it. And Gurudev is laughing hysterically at all of this. And the room, a lot of people on this occasion, hundreds of people there. And I would say the vast majority are very uncomfortable and very hesitant about laughing at this stuff because it seems pretty un-yogic. They're not being nice. They're fighting and it's violent. That's what slapstick is, right? And he's laughing and laughing. And I remember that I was laughing a lot. Jagannath was sitting next to him, also loves Laurel and Hardy, as it turns out, and was sitting really close to him. And Gurudev would nudge him and say, watch this, because he'd seen it before. and at a certain point near the end, I think you had to be sitting close to hear this. It wasn't that he wasn't on a microphone or anything, but was sitting close enough. And Gurudev he just said, "My little saints." Could you hear? My little saints. So knowing his love for this, he was at the New York IYI sometime, I think later in the lobby. So I already knew this. And it came up as he was leaving that and there was a big crowd of people around, that he had some raccoons that had become like his pets, that he would feed some wild raccoons at his place in Connecticut, his house, which is outside of the ashram then. And it came up that he named the raccoons Fred and Ethel. So anyone who knows I Love Lucy, Fred and Ethel. So it actually came up that they were the neighbors. These things that we take for granted that everybody knows, everyone below a certain age has no idea what I'm talking about. But it was a huge sitcom from the 50s and the 60s. And also very broad comedy. So I chimed in at this moment wanting to share something, knowing that he obviously loved I Love Lucy and loved Laurel and Hardy. I said, Gurudev, have you seen The Honeymooners, which was my favorite, Jackie Gleason, I loved that. So I just quite genuinely wanted to share it with him. And he said, I never watched that. I thought it, probably inappropriate for a sannyasi to watch because it's The Honeymooners. It's a show about people on their honeymoon. And I said, oh, no, Gurudev. Like I was really telling him something. I'm sure he's having great fun with me. Although he probably might not have watched it. I said, no, it's very funny. I think you'd really like it. So that was that exchange. So it often strikes us that one of the reasons he kept us all around all these years is that we put on a great slapstick show for him through most of our lives together with him. It must have been very entertaining. Here's another in the car after late at night after a lecture story. It was Washington, D.C. IYI, and Rishi and I were in the car with him. I can't remember who was driving. That's not an important detail. I was sitting in the back seat right behind Gurudev, and we're coming back from a great lecture in a church, big crowd, and taking him to the place where he's going to spend the night. And at one point, I look forward and I notice that the button isn't down. Door locks in those days were buttons, like a cylinder that you had to push down. And it just crossed my mind that it should be locked. It would be safer. So I reach forward very easily from where I'm sitting, because it was actually a two-door car. So the button was way towards me in the back. And I reached out with my finger to push it down. And exactly, just like synchronized swimming, perfectly synchronized, Gurudev reaches back from his seat with his great flexibility. I can't even show you how how graceful it was, to push the button at the exact same moment as my finger arrives. His finger arrives and goes on top of my finger to push down the button. Yeah. That was it. I was well occupied for the next few hours. We got out of the car. I was already, in a extremely altered state. And Rishi, who lived at the Institute, got out of the car, and Gurudev was just beaming. And he put his arms way out and he gave us these huge embrace. And we saw him off. We floated back into the car. We compared notes and agreed that we were in samadhi. And we remained that way for a long time afterward. And my finger, that his finger had been on, at some point, I didn't think to do this. I just happened to move my finger near my nose, and it smelled intensely sandalwood and rose, and like one of those complicated gourmet incenses. So in satsang, a lot of my Gurudev stories are moments from satsang where we got to ask questions, usually written, sometimes verbally, but usually written. This was a written one. And I had said, Gurudev, when you're doing deep relaxation and witnessing the mind, how in deep relaxation, that's a key moment in it, is that you relax, physically, and then you watch the breath, and then you watch the mind, you witness the mind, as he teaches us. And I said, when you're witnessing the mind, where are you watching from? This is what I had written out. Is it the Ajna Chakra, which is the brow center that's commonly called the third eye, but it's actually in the middle of the head, behind there, in the middle of the brain. So that's what the question said. And Gurudev read it. And this was his tone. It was an interesting tone. He said, yes, the Ajna Chakra is the center of awareness. It was like, yeah, you got that right. but he was saying it in that kind of like, yes, like it's no big deal. And he said, but you're really watching from everywhere. And I don't want to give a lot of commentary when I tell these stories, just let them stand on their own. But I'll just say that to me, what that meant immediately, that is, instead of me, so to speak, being in the center, looking out at something, I was on the, circumference, the whole universe, looking in. Now, if I could just do that consistently, unfortunately, this is not something that you do. It's something that you are. Very interesting. You watch from everywhere. So another card that I put in the question box, it was always so special when you got to do this and he read your card. He didn't always, and you didn't always put one in. Most of the time I didn't want to bother him with questions. I felt like I could tune in and get the answer, and there was no need to take the time. But sometimes a question would come that I really wanted to know, like that one. And then this next one, I really wanted to know this. Let's see, it's not in the picture here, but you all know our beautiful yantra that's prominently featured on all of our altars and really prominently featured in the satsang hall. In fact, at one point, a scene set had been constructed for a play that was going to be offered to him as an offering the next day, and it covered the back of the stage where the very large yantra hangs, and it couldn't be seen. And he said, at the end of that satsang, he said, "Where's the yantra?" "Oh, it's right behind the scenery, Gurudev." He said, "I won't be coming to the big event unless you make it so that the yantra can be seen." He said, "You don't know everything that has ever happened in this organization. It comes from that. You think that it comes from me. It all comes from that." So I asked him this question. I said, "Gurudev, is there a special way to salute the yantra?" I'll interject here that, as you'll hear in a moment, I've always been in love with the yantra. I love the yantra intensely. So I got the idea that I wanted to salute the yantra whenever I came into Guru Bhavan or any altar where the yantra was there. And I said, is there a special way to salute the yantra like Jai Shri Satguru Maharaj Ki? So, showing an example of a salutation, because that's how you salute the Guru. And I signed it a yantra lover. And Gurudev read that, and he absolutely beamed when he read that yantra lover. In other words, he loved hearing that, but here's what the answer was. It was another startling answer for me. So he read the whole thing, and then he said, so, and it ended with, something like Jai Shri Satguru Maharaj Ki. And he said, yes, that's good. So that was the salutation. This is the Guru of Gurus, the light that removes darkness, is the yantra. And then he said, at the end, he said, just keep on loving the yantra. I've taken that advice. I'm good at instructions that I have, that I'm already totally aligned to. And speaking of yantra, I once asked in a big public lecture before Lotus was built and dedicated, again, on a card. And my question was, I said, is the geometry of Lotus, being that it's a three-dimensional yantra that you're entering, create a special healing vibrational field? Because we always talked about how the symbolism of the one light illuminating all the paths and all the paths leading back to the one light. It's so beautiful. I mean, it's so incredibly perfect in showing that, boom, just like that. And, but I was asking something on a little esoteric level, and he gave, his tone was similar to, the Ajna Chakra tone. You're like, yes, but a little different. He read it. It was in a big gathering. Again, I think it was in a big church. And I think this was in New York. And he said, he read it and he said, well, normally I don't talk about this. But, and then he validated that thinking completely, that basically what you're doing is entering a giant Yantra chamber, that you don't have to meditate on it, it meditates you. So I think Kamsanandaji once told a story about Gurudev telling her, I don't care what you do, for healing something. He said, just go in there. You can do anything. Just stay in there, even if you have to lie down or something like that. I may be butchering the story, but it's good for my purposes, so I'll leave it like that, and I'll get caught up with you about it later. But it was like that. It was just be in there. Just go, be in there. Said the same thing about getting up at Brahma Muhurta. He said, just be up at that hour, even if you don't meditate. If you're up for those 2 or 3 hours before sunrise, just be up, be doing anything at that hour. It's that the vibration is that special. The benefit is that great, but you don't want to be sleeping. You want to be up. So he said the exact same thing to me once. I asked a question about the triple lock, which is in his Integral Yoga Hatha book, which involves doing all these bandhas at once. And I asked something that didn't seem to be spelled out in the directions and wanted it clarified. And he said, he said the exact same words. He said, well, normally I don't talk about this. It's like, it is an interesting feeling because it kind of made me feel good. He was going like, yeah, you're tuned in. You are tuned into something here. It's just not something that I want to give all the details about necessarily. That actually felt very special when something like that would happen. Here's something that felt really nice, very simple. Went to a talk in Lynchburg, Virginia, near here, near our ashram in Virginia, and that Gurudev gave. And afterwards, there was a reception, and everyone was sitting and standing around having tea, including Gurudev, and there were little treats and things. And I just wanted to be attentive to him. I wasn't his attendant at all, but I wanted to be attentive to him and not do anything else. And he just turned to me and he said, would you like some tea? And I said, no, Gurudev, I'm fine. And he said, I know you are fine. Would you like some tea? So Disney World, a few quick Disney World stories. Disney World in Orlando. So this was a trip with Prakash and myself, come down from Washington, and some other Washington people and some Florida folks. And when we first entered it's the only time I've been to a Disney World or Disneyland, this one time. So, but the gates are very, very wide, and the cars are coming in, and there's tremendous numbers of cars and lanes. And we were in different cars, of course. I was in the car with Gurudev. We got separated from the car with Prakash. And when you entered by different lanes, and we were sort of swept along as if by a flood, you could never get back to the other side. It could be far, far away, the gate that you went through. And we waited a little bit, and I was anxiously looking around, hoping to hook back up. And we didn't see her. And then as we started touring around, and we had, some folks who knew Disney World well taking us around, and Gurudev seemed to be enjoying everything, eagerly seeing everything. And I kept looking around distractedly, where's Prakash? How are we going to hook up with Prakash? And I wasn't saying that, but I was feeling it a lot. And I might have said something, but in any case, at one point he turned to me and he said, it's a wide world, he said to me. If we happen to meet, fine. If not, that's all right too. It's just like, accept it. This is what's happening. So I relaxed, and a little while later, she found the main group, and we were reunited. Meanwhile, Paraman was walking along next to Gurudev, feeling, very repulsed by the craven, materialism of Disney World. This was much too commercial for me, and I was going around very grumpily, not enjoying anything at all. Not the happy-go-lucky fellow that you see before you all these decades later. and when I think back on it, wow, what a waste. I was being like so grumpy. It's all so, materialistic. And I certainly didn't say a word about any of that. Gurudev seemed delighted and was looking around and everything. And fortunately for me, mercifully for me, he turned to me early in the excursion and he said, look at all of the happy people. Look how happy they are. All they can think about is the next, the next thing that they're going to see. they're so happy. And it was like, it was like the scales fell from my eyes. I looked around and I said, oh, I'm surrounded by like happiness and joy and children just, prancing around and big smiles on adults and children looking forward to the next thing. So I was relieved of that old grumpy man that I was dragging around, the husk of my past. Dylan has that great. Is it Dylan who says, "But I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now." That's what yoga does. It makes you younger than your old self, at least in my case. And one other little Disney World story on that same trip. We went into a big theater to see like an IMAX movie of something or other. Gurudev makes quite an impression wherever he goes. And a little child who was sitting in the row in front of us, got on their knees in their seat and turned right around and was asking us all these questions, wanting to know what this was and why we were dressed funny and all of this, and what we were doing. And Gurudev, again, I don't know how I got so lucky to be so closely sitting with him the whole time. It wasn't like I was really hosting this event, but I was right next to him. And he asked me, he indicated that I should answer the child. So I said something that a little child might understand about what yoga was and said this and that. And he let me finish. And then afterwards, he didn't interrupt at all, but afterwards he leaned over to me and he said, especially with children, he said, you should always tell them something about vegetarianism and being kind to animals. I thought that was beautiful because I missed that. Not harming animals. So another time Gurudev took me to the circus was in the name of a recording session for Sanskrit sloka pronunciation recording that was done in somebody's professional recording studio outside of Charlottesville. So we traveled up from the ashram and he wanted me there to, the product that came out says, there's Sri Swami Satchidananda chanting the Sanskrit slokas, pronunciation guide or something like that, which are repeated by a Western devotee. So I got to represent the Western devotee responding as he led the chants, meaning you'll get to, I think the idea was you'll get to hear somebody doing it perfectly and then somebody doing it, pretty wrong. In my mind, that was sort of the plan. I hadn't asked for the job. I guess maybe I was flattered, but I was also very intimidated. I'm not a Sanskritist. I'm not a scholarly in that way at all. I do love the chants. I've always loved the chants, just like the Yantra. By the way, Gurudev said once that loving all of these things was proof that we were all reincarnated Indians who got fascinated with the materialism of the West. And that's why we were born here. He said there's no other explanation for why you like, the chants and the food, like Bhajis and all of that. So hey, there's actually a thread here. He actually said that. So I did love the chants. And for some reason, I was asked to be the Western devotee. That's my big credit. So in this recording session, Gurudev, in this relatively small, acoustically perfect room, we're sitting at right angles. So if I'm sitting here, he's sitting over here facing this way, and I'm facing this way. And, we both have earphones on, and, we have these fancy microphones, and I'm listening to him chant. And then I'm to repeat everything that he does. And this should be easy because he's just doing the familiar opening chants that we've been doing for, with him for decades. Except that on this occasion, he put in, Lakshmi can attest, he was there. He put in like so many variations, and he was doing, quarter tones, and he was chanting, like one of these, bhajan prodigies, and doing all the very subtle things, which he always did in his chants to some extent, but he turned it up, as they say in Spinal Tap, to 11. His capacity to do that. And I was desperately trying to keep up. And he was doing pronunciations and melodies, especially that I don't think any of us had ever heard. And I was trying really, really hard to repeat everything the way he did it. And he said something about this. But before I tell you what that was, I have to say, here's my experience. I'm looking this way. He's looking that way. So I'm seeing him the whole time. I'm focused very intently on him so that I can come in. I'm watching his lips to try to figure out, what is he saying? He's doing a chant that I've done 1,000 times, and I don't know. I can't really get this melody or pronunciation at all. And then I repeat. And while I'm repeating, and this is all being recorded, I have this front row seat, the hot seat of Gurudev, watching his face, which I have to do. And he's doing this while Paraman's chanting. He's going, I'm really not exaggerating. This is just grimacing, like, oh, this is the most horrible thing that I've ever heard. And he's doing that a lot on almost every single line. And I am like, so on top of trying to like meditate on what in the world is he doing? What are these sounds? I have to watch his reaction. It's not like I can close my eyes or ignore it because I'm desperately trying to keep up. And at a certain point, while I was desperately trying to keep up, I was meditating on what he was doing, and I was trying to make the sounds the way he was making the sounds. He was making the sounds like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's how he was making the sounds. So I was dutifully really trying to do it just the way he did it. And at a certain point, he turned and he said, I wrote this down because Lakshmi remembered it verbatim. He said, I know what you're trying to do. He said to me, you can't do it like me. Don't even try. And then I relaxed. And afterwards, I went up to him. He fired me in the middle to try to get me to relax, and brought someone else in, and she did a little bit with. I was kind of relieved to see how difficult it was for somebody with a really beautiful voice. And then he fired her and brought me back in, because I thought I was off the hook, and I was so relieved. And I guess everything let go, and then I was able to chant maybe a little bit better. And then afterwards, he said, "You used to chant so beautifully." He said, "You sounded like a frog." This is his comment to me. And I knelt down. He was standing, and I knelt down and put my head on his feet. Yes, Gurudev. And I got up, and he said, "You should do that more. You should do more of that." So I knelt down again, put my head on his feet, and he said, very seriously, and he said, no, not now. He said, do it 24 times a day, prostrations. And unfortunately, one of his eager devotees who was standing nearby said, "Why not 108, Gurudev?" So for the year or two that I would do that every day, I often thought, you do the extra 28. Why did you have to go from 80 to 108? But I would do the 108 because he agreed that was a good idea. It was a great exercise. Yeah. So where are we? And then the final, the coup de grace miracle of that story is that I got back to the ashram, sat down with Vidyananda ji, who was in charge of Shaktikam at the time, and we listened to the tape, me with a lot of trepidation, to see, how much of what I had done was going to have to be redone. And so we were listening for major departures from what he had done, or it sounding really bad or whatever. And we couldn't find anything wrong with it. We listened to the tape and it was perfect. I'm not saying that I did what he does. I followed his directions and didn't even try, but the tape was perfect. And to this day, I feel like there's no way that that's actually what I chanted, but that's the way it came out on the tape. And I'm not saying that the product is necessarily great or perfect, but at least that first listening, it was just a complete shock because she was listening with great care and discrimination. So was I. She wasn't interested in being, sparing my feelings or anything, which was fine, because I already thought I had done a terrible job. So I couldn't be any more humiliated. And it was essentially perfect. So yeah, what a master. I'm going to tell some Mahasamadhi stories. Mahasamadhi is the term that's used in India to indicate when a realized master leaves the body. Instead of calling it, saying he or she died or he or she left the body, which is a frequent way we refer to people, what is usually referred to as dying. There's the special term for a realized master is Maha Samadhi. The great Samadhi means absorption or the highest state or awakening. So the idea is that the master consciously exits the body at will, at the right moment, in the right way. I'll tell you what that's all about. Who knows? Maybe, maybe tonight, maybe some other time. But the night that he left the body, all of us remember where we were and what we were doing when we heard, of course, and there was a buildup. We knew that he was in a hospital in India, and we were getting updates, and there was lots of prayers and incredible energy. And then when we heard that he'd left the body, actually, a moment before he left the body, that we heard it, I turned to Lakshmi and I said, at home, we were in our living room, and I said, he's fine. He's going to be fine, because it had seemed very grim, like he was definitely going to leave the body. And I said, no, he's fine. I feel it. And then almost immediately after that, the phone rang to tell us that he had taken Mahasamadhi. So after calling our dearest friends to talk about it and this and that, and going back over to the ashram to be with Sangha that were spontaneously gathering and all of that, well, they had been for hours. Finally, like 2 a.m, we got to sit in front of our altar, which I told you the other day, Gurudev had blessed. And to just get quiet and meditate and or try to meditate. We sat and my mind just started spinning wildly, and it started remembering everything that I had received from Gurudev. And I was just going, thank you for, the mantra. Thank you for this. Thank you. But it was much more specific that the biggest gratitude list imaginable. And, it was totally heartfelt. And I was going on and on and on like this, really just like an ocean pouring out. And Gurudev showed up, and unmistakably, I heard his voice inside. And when that happens, it's not like in a movie where you hear a voice that from heaven or something like that. It's kind of better than that. It's inside. It's unmistakably was him. Because of the vibration was unmistakable. And what he said was, he said, Paraman, why are you thanking me? Do you think I'm done giving to you? I have much more to give to you. So this was extremely good news. And I can't remember whether it was just before that. I think it was after that I saw an ocean of consciousness. And I'm telling you this not to say, oh, look at this vision that I had, or aren't I special that he spoke to me, but there's a wonderful affirmation of the immortality that we all share. I saw an ocean of consciousness. I saw is a weak word. I experienced an ocean of consciousness, and there were spires of light rising out of it like this in swirls. And I talked to my good buddy, Jagannath. I can't remember whether I spoke to him after that in the middle of the night or whether it was the next day. It might have been the next day. I'd already spoken to him to tell him as soon as we heard the news. And I started to describe that to him. And he had seen the same thing exactly. And and that's why I wanted to share it with you, because it was such a great confirmation of the reality of that experience. He had seen the same thing. And when I started to describe it the way when you're reaching to describe something that there's no words for, but I said, it's like, and he was filling in what I was about to say. I said, it reminded me of that Van Gogh painting. He said, the Van Gogh painting, yes, with the swirls, of energy going up in the ocean. He had seen the exact same thing and experienced it. So I knew that it was, if there had been any doubt, I knew even more that Gurudev was assuring me that he was alive and well. And I've never doubted that. Another little Mahasamadhi story, when we all gathered at Chidambaram and Gurudev's body was in a coffin initially. This was before the entombment, and people gathered, hundreds of us. People were coming from all over the country, and we were sitting on the lower level, and up on the raised platform that is in front of the altar was the open casket, and you couldn't really see from where we were sitting as people processed up to pay their respects. So, there's a certain nervousness. What's this going to be like? And I got up there, and the way we were going clockwise, I went first to the head, and there was a big ghee light, a lamp with clarified butter, like an oil lamp, a big floor one, standing at the head and at the feet. And so I went past the head. As soon as I looked down and saw the body, I was tremendously relieved because I looked at the body and I went, oh, whew, it's just a husk. It's just an empty husk. He's definitely not in there. So I paid my respects. I got to the feet and bowed. And while I was bowing at the feet, I felt someone slapping me from behind, really vigorously slapping me down in this area. I don't know whether you can see, but sort of like the tail of my shirt. And it was Mitra Metro, my beloved brother. And he just leaned forward because I didn't even turn around when he started slapping me. I was too busy pranaming to the feet. And he said, you caught on fire. He whispered to me, you were on fire. I still have that shirt, and it has this big burn hole. And I had passed that first ghee lamp, and I'd like to say that I just burst into flames, but the lamp was the agency for that. So that was it's very sweet to burst into flames in front of Gurudev, relieved that he was just that the body was just a husk and to be put out by my brother. And Mitra features in a couple of these other stories. So one of the most interesting things about the entombment at Chidambaram is that it was originally planned that Gurudev, it's traditional that if you're going to entomb a saint, a realized person, that they be seated in lotus. So the whole tomb was built for that. It was more or less a cube, and he was going to be seated like that. But because the body had to be transported back from India, and that all was planned long before anything was known about where he'd leave the body. But since the body was transported back, days had gone by, there's tons of miracle stories around that for another time, perhaps. But it was decided that it wasn't a good idea by all the people clustered around. I happened to be there, and there was a doctor devotee and many, many other devotees deciding how things were going to be done. And it was decided it wasn't a good idea to try to put the body into lotus pose. We're going to change everything. Talk about changing the award presentation. We're going to entomb him standing up, because the body is, that's how it arrives, stretched out. And we don't want to be bending the limbs and all of this after these days have gone by. So standing up, when the whole plan was the other way, it was built the other way, it was designed that way by Gurudev. So here's some two little interesting things about that. Years before, I told you about when we toured the US Capitol and Gurudev had slipped off his shoe and felt the marble with his foot. On that same tour, we went to the Rotunda, which is under the big dome of the Capitol, which is probably more famous now for recent history, but it was famous for a lot of other things before that. And so I, trying to be a good host, I was from the Washington IYI at the time, so this is years before, many years before. And I said, Gurudev, we're standing right on the spot in the center of the rotunda floor, which is a bindu, basically. like the Bindu at the center of the Yantra. And I said, this is where when presidents die, they lie in state. I was just trying to be, a tour guide. And he was standing right on the spot when I said that and gestured. And he said, so I'm standing in state. See, this is many, many years before. Now, the final piece of that puzzle involves Mitra. I didn't hear this from Mitra. I heard it from his brother, our beloved Reverend Bhagwan, told me that one day when Gurudev was inspecting Chidambaram when it was being built and getting ready to leave, he was alone, perhaps with Mitra. I don't think Bhagavan was there. I don't know that detail. But in any case, Gurudev turned to Mitra, gestured back at Chidambaram behind him, and said, there's where I'll stand forever, ready to serve. So there you go, standing in state. And by the way, that last minute change to have to completely redo the crypt, the tomb, led to one of the greatest pujas that's ever happened in the history of the universe. I have no doubt. But that's another story because after all the fancy ceremonies, we had a spontaneous worship that involved everyone getting involved in building that up very, very spontaneously and worshiping and pouring holy ash into the tomb. It was the most amazing thing imaginable. It wasn't the main ceremony. It was a ceremony after the ceremony. And while we're on the subject of Chidambaram, Gurudev, when it was a period when his body had gone through some physical difficulties, and people were told to be very careful about his physical health and not to strain him in any way or tire him. And he was seen by many as being frail. He had gone through some pretty major, physical stuff years prior to leaving the body. So he was coming to the dedication of Chidambaram, because the building needed to be dedicated, of course, long before before taking Mahasamadhi. And when he arrived down in the parking lot, and there's a pretty long flight of stairs up to Chidambaram. And they're very, if I dare say, they're probably deliberately very awkward stairs that make you like really pause and labor to get up them because they're not at a comfortable distance. I just climbed them today and yet again noticed how it's just like impossible to just walk up these steps. Not easy, somewhat steep. And tiring. So he got out of the car and there was a little rain falling, and Mitra had opened the door and was holding an umbrella for him. And I was at the top of the steps, and we happened to have a big umbrella with us. So I was standing holding an umbrella, to greet him when he got to the top. But I could see that they were going to walk him up the steps with the umbrella. But the frail, weak, sickly guru got out of the car and just took off up the steps. And Mitra, who is as big and strapping and strong as you could be, and a few other strong people who had umbrellas, took off after him because they were going to walk up stately. Hundreds of people were waiting to greet him and lining the steps in the front. And they wanted in the light rain to hold the umbrellas over him, and they couldn't keep up with him because he just went at a full sprint up the entire awkward flight of steps to the top. There's a picture of me holding an umbrella over him when he got to the top, and I turned to him and I said, Gurudev, very spontaneously, I said, it was great seeing you run up the steps like that. And he said, he just said, he said, that was nothing. He said, I used to run up the 1,500 steps to Palani Temple every day at a full run. That was nothing. He said, yeah. During the times when he was supposedly ailing, he could turn that completely on and off. It was amazing. Couple of more short, we're talking about prophetic things that he said, brings to mind the time when he was being given a tour in New York, and I was in the car, and somebody was pointing out the World Trade Center and saying some statistics about it and how it was the tallest, this and that, and he just turned to them and he said, someday the whole thing will fall down. And they said, oh no, Gurudev. He said, it's built on bedrock. That's the great feature that allows skyscrapers in New York City, is the bedrock and the foundation. And Gurudev said, yes, but what is the bedrock on? Couple of other short ones. I don't know how short I can make this one. Actually, this was at the National Institutes of Health. You may have heard of that. NIH in Washington, D.C., again, for my wonderful years at the DCIYI. Gurudev was giving a talk to all health professionals in a big auditorium at the National Institute of Health. So there's all doctors and nurses and PhDs, but mostly MDs gathered in this big lecture hall. You know how they are, amphitheaters, with the seats slanting down, very modern, very fancy, big, your tax dollars at work. And he gave, one of those talks that it sounded like, the Buddha was speaking from thousands of years before, or all the ancient sages. It was just so homespun, and so not him trying to look impressively smart or full of medical knowledge, even though he was, he knew everything about medicine in actual practice. But a very humble talk about the right way to live your life. And at a certain point, he said, and nowadays people are even afraid of their bodily functions. They're ashamed of it. You go to a party and you don't even want to say the word, like, where's the restroom? So he was making fun of that, and he was saying how bad it is to hold it in when you have to go. And this is what he said, which I've never forgotten. Now, if he had just said something like what I just said, I wouldn't remember this at all. But because he said it this way, and he says things like this, when one of his ways to make sure that you remember, at a certain point, he looked out with a booming voice after setting that up about, the wrong shame about restrooms and all of that. He said, no real man ever stops urinating. And you're sitting there going like, wow. That's exactly what he said. And that's how he said it. He said it very booming and theatrically, nice and loud, the complete opposite of whispering to ask where the restroom is. No real man ever stops urinating. Here's another little health tip. It was a retreat out in California. And in those days, I think we might have stopped doing this, but we often still teach kriyas on the retreats. And some of the kriyas are dramatic, like drinking a lot of salt water and throwing it up to clean out your stomach. And some are a little simpler, like neti, neti pots and salt water in your nose and all that. Well, we didn't have neti pots in those days at the retreats. But we were ambitious, young, early 20-somethings. So we were going to teach them how to do string neti, which I think might be described in his book. And it involves having a waxed string and putting it into your nose and getting it out through the back of your mouth and then moving the string back and forth, because this is going to like really clean out your sinuses. And no doubt, I was never big on trying to do stuff like that because of my anatomy. It's not conducive to that, but that's a different story. In any case, a girl under the able instruction of our staff, everyone was trying this. It was voluntary. We weren't forcing anybody, of course, but a young girl, maybe in her late teens or early 20s, had gotten the string in and gotten it stuck far in and couldn't get it out and couldn't have it go in further, and was trying to get it out. And everyone gathered around and was trying to help her, and the staff was doing this and that and trying to get her to relax. And she was going into full panic mode more and more. It just felt wrong, get this out, but it hurt. And she couldn't just pull it out, and it was panicking. And Gurudev just showed up at that moment. He hadn't been there. I think he came driving up, maybe in a Jeep, I'm not sure. But he came up, went right over to her, and, all of her resistance stopped. She calmed down. He reached out. He took the string and he just went like that, and it came right out. It like fell out. He just twisted it a little bit. It reminds me of a great story Morgananda tells of Gurudev giving him this plant that I don't quite know the name, but it's some sort of angel hair fern sort of plant that was at his house near the Santa Barbara ashram, Gurudev's house. And it was all these very, very fine vines with little delicate leaves, and they were all tangled, and they were doing a lot of gardening, and it was a potted plant. And Morgananda was trying very carefully to untangle the plant as part of what they were fixing. And Gurudev came over at a certain point and just, it had dozens and dozens of vines, and and it was all knotted. And he just delicately, he described it like the same way, with these very fine movements, and it all just fell unknotted, untying our knots. And we're coming right up on 9, so I'm going to end in just a moment. I once saw Gurudev down near Lotus area. He was driving himself around. He had his arm outside the car window, like this, right? Resting on the open frame of the window while we all came over, and he was getting ready to leave, and we were seeing him off. A small group, it wasn't a big gathering. And while we all stood more or less transfixed, which was a common occurrence around Gurudev, a little bee landed on his exposed arm, and we all kind of went, landed his arm, hunched its back, and everyone was looking at it, and Gurudev was looking at it, and it just hunched its back and stung him. Stuck the stinger in right in front of it. Oh, just then I said this, a fly is walking by next to me. Hello, sir. And we were all kind of frozen, and then it pulled away, and it flew away, and people came rushing over, and people were picking up mud from nearby to apply to the bee sting, and Gurudev's just sitting there calmly. I was very close, and there was nothing on his arm. There was like no reaction. You know how you get a raised bump when you get a sting and it happens immediately? He didn't move or flinch in the least. There was no sign in his face or his body at all that he had just been stung. And they were saying, get this, get that. We'll, we're going to put some of this on it. And Gurudev will do this. And he just said, the best thing is to just do nothing. And I think we were forced to let him leave. He just drove off. This is very good advice. The best thing is to just do nothing. And on that note, I just want to encourage you to come to the, I hope you all heard that we're having a bonus session next time, next Tuesday, a week from today, same time, same place. And I'll just say this, it's going to be, we have some special surprises. We've done the 4 Guru Slokas, so we have something very special at the beginning. So make sure you're there at the beginning. And since we've exhausted the slokas, we've got something else for you that's quite wonderful that will be debuting thanks to Nataraj, who's our moderator and technical support and artist and devotee. So we'll start a little bit differently, and then we'll have some wonderful stories. And I've saved what might be the most important story for last. So that's my encouragement for you to join me, because I do love sharing this with you all. And Hamsanandaji, you'll have to let me know how much I may have butchered. Here's the story about Gurudev saying, just go in there, and even if you have to lie down, just be in there. That's basically, that's the gist of it, right? You want to unmute and just tell us, since now I've asked you twice. Is that? Okay.
Have we got time?
Well, we're a little over, but go ahead.
Okay. So it was the Lotus dedication, the opening. And I had been serving in guest services, and I was a mess, just a mess. I was going to, anyway, let me shorten it. And I thought, well, I'm just overtired. That Gurudev's guests came. We kept taking them to Monticello. I was going there every other day with people from India. And I was so tired. And I thought, well, I'm just tired. Okay, so I was going to go on a vacation right away after the dedication. So I ended up in New York City at the IYI. And I'm shortening the story. And I thought that if I hadn't had his protection, I was going to either have a nervous breakdown or go crazy. Really, that's what I thought at that time. And I called him, and he picked up the phone right away. That doesn't happen too often. It didn't happen much with me.
Yeah.
But you knew it was serious if he picked up the phone when you called. So he said, you never should have left the ashram. Get back here as fast as you can. And he said, go in the Lotus Shrine, and you just stay there. You don't have to eat. You don't have to come out to sleep. You just stay there and meditate. So I would go there, and I'd fall asleep and everything. I don't think I was eating. I don't think anything. I just stayed there. And that was it. I just stayed in there for weeks, Wow. I mean, I would leave, but I was just there every day and night as long as I could. And it was healing me. And I'm not one to have these experiences and exotic this and that. But there's something in the Lotus Shrine, which I don't know these things, but there's something in there that can heal you. And he put it in there. And yeah, I got better. I'd lie down. Didn't matter. He said, you don't even have to meditate. Just get in there.
Yeah.
So that's a place to go and be healed.
Yeah.
So I remember we used to go every single day for meditation. And I'll finish now, but this is fun too. So I did get better. Not just like that, but I was in there. I did what he said. And this is the thing. You'd go every day for noon meditation. And a couple of times a year, he would come to the noon meditation. So the worst thing in the world would be if that was the one day of the year or the second time in the whole year when you didn't go to meditation.
Yeah.
Or this is probably even worse. You would get there, you'd meditate, you wouldn't know he was there, and then you heard that he was there and you missed the whole thing. You were there too, but you didn't know he was there. So anyway, your stories are fabulous.
I love you all.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Thank you.